The first time she said, "Don't let me go alone," it was not in a boardroom, not in a polished office with glass walls and glowing city lights behind her, and not with the cold authority that had made grown men sit straighter in their chairs. It was in the parking garage, under a flickering fluorescent light that made everything look pale and haunted. Her hand was gripping the edge of her car door so tightly her knuckles had gone white, and for one terrible second, Daniel thought she might collapse right there between the concrete pillars and the oil stains. She was still wearing the sharp black coat and high heels she had worn to command a room full of investors that afternoon, but now she looked like someone holding herself together by the thinnest possible thread. Her lipstick had faded, her breath shook in uneven bursts, and when she looked at him, there was no trace of the woman who terrified half the company. There was only fear. Raw, humiliating, human fear. And Daniel, a tired single father who still had grocery bags in the backseat of his car and a half-finished science project waiting at home on the kitchen table, stared at his boss and heard himself say the strangest, most reckless words of his life. "So, where do I sleep?" If you believe every story hides a lesson somewhere inside it, take a second to like, comment, share, and subscribe to Humanity Stories, because some of the quietest moments leave the deepest mark. Daniel had spent the last 4 years surviving by routine. Not living, not dreaming, not really hoping for much beyond getting through one more week without disaster. Morning lunches packed in the dim yellow light of his apartment kitchen. Tiny socks paired on the couch while the coffee burned. School drop-offs, commutes, deadlines, calls from teachers, late rent calculations done in his head while pretending to listen during meetings. He had once been the kind of man who made plans 6 months ahead, who thought life moved in a clean line if you worked hard enough and loved carefully enough. Then his wife died 3 days after their son turned 3, and the line broke so violently that everything after it felt improvised. Since then, the world had become a place of lists and alarms and barely managed exhaustion. His son, Noah, was 7 now, all white eyes and missing front teeth and quiet questions asked at bedtime in the dark. Daniel lived for that boy with a devotion so complete it had hollowed him and filled him at the same time. At work, Daniel kept his head down. He was dependable, invisible in the way overworked people often become. He fixed problems before they spread. He stayed late without making speeches about sacrifice. He wore shirts ironed just well enough to pass and shoes that were beginning to split at the sides. He had learned long ago that offices loved resilience as long as it was silent. And above them all was Evelyn Hart, the regional director, the woman people described in careful tones when she wasn't around. Brilliant, controlled, impossible to read, she moved through the office like she had built the place herself, all precision and sharp corners, with a gaze that could make a bad presentation collapse halfway through. Daniel had never thought of her as cruel exactly. Just distant, untouchable, like one of those elegant buildings downtown made entirely of glass, beautiful until you got close enough to see your own reflection trembling in it. He had noticed things, though, because tired people often notice what polished people miss. He noticed the nights her office light stayed on long after everyone had gone. He noticed the untouched catered lunches after major meetings. He noticed the way she sometimes paused before answering simple questions, as if she had just returned from somewhere far away. Once, very late, while he was waiting for a report to upload, he saw her standing alone at the conference room window, staring down at the rain on the street below with the stillness of someone listening for bad news that had already arrived. He looked away quickly, the way decent people do when they accidentally witness another person's private fracture. The truth reached him in pieces, and not because she told him. People in offices always know how to speak around tragedy before they know how to speak about it. He heard that her mother was sick. Then that it was serious. Then that there were specialists, private rooms, transfers, setbacks. Then nothing at all, which somehow said even more. Evelyn kept showing up in tailored suits with perfect posture and clipped instructions, but something in her had shifted. Her voice remained steady, yet the edges of it sounded thinner. Her eyes seemed older by the week. Once she called Daniel into her office to discuss a logistics issue and lost her place in the middle of a sentence. Not for long. Just a pause. Just long enough for the silence to become visible. She blinked, straightened a file, and resumed speaking as though nothing had happened. But Daniel carried that moment home with him. He had seen grief before it fully arrived. It always entered the room early. That night in the parking garage, the hospital had called while she was still at her desk. Daniel knew because he had passed her office and seen her standing motionless beside the ringing phone, staring at it with an expression that made his chest tighten. She answered. Said almost nothing. Then she came out 10 minutes later, walking too fast, keys in one hand, phone in the other, like someone fleeing a fire no one else could see. He might have let her go. Maybe he should have. But something about the way she pressed the elevator button twice, missing it the first time because her hand was trembling, made him follow. He told himself it was practical. That she looked in no state to drive. That any decent colleague would at least ask if she needed help. But when the words finally came from her in the garage, "Don't let me go alone," they were so naked, so stripped of rank and pride and distance, that all practicality vanished. There was only a human being reaching through her own breaking. The hospital was 40 minutes away, and the city looked strange from the passenger seat of Evelyn's car. Rain dragged silver lines across the windshield. Red taillights smeared into rivers. Daniel texted his elderly neighbor, Mrs. Alvarez.